Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Professor Choi, and the moderator of these sessions. I'm very excited to welcome you to the 2020 and 21 OGP Academy. It is co-hosted by Open Government Partnerships and KDIS School of Public Policy and Management. This session title is Youth Participations and Representation in Public Life. Simultaneous interpretations to Korean and English is available for all these sessions. So if you want to take the course, the session in English or Korean, please click on the globe icons at the bottom of your screen to activate it. Okay? And throughout the sessions, each presentation make it in 10 minutes. And right after that, there is a short Q&A sessions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A functions. After all these three presentations, we will also have discussion sessions. And you use the same Q&A functions for the discussions. Okay, let's hear the presentation from the first presenters, the Kim Jeoun, the professor of KDIS course. Okay.
Can you all see my screen? Hello?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay, good. So hi, I'm Jeoun Kim. I'm assistant professor at KDIS School of Public Policy and Management, and I'll be talking about misogynistic ideals in South Korea, which is one of the most contentious debates in MZ generations. So millennials and Generation Z comprise the key demographic group driving the left-wing movements. And among these many topics, misogyny has attracted a lot of attentions among MZ generations. Despite substantial progress of women in public sphere, there has been consistent instances of harassment and violence against women, which has brought discussion of misogyny. And misogynistic ideal is understood one of the key underlying force of these instances of harassment and violence against women. We talk about misogyny a lot, but there's conceptual unclarity about misogyny. So what is misogyny? Misogyny is commonly known as hatred against women, and it's often confused with sexism. And we often assume that misogyny is binary. So there's misogynist and non-misogynist. However, recent gender scholars started to argue that misogyny is not individual personality traits and some problems of the few men. Misogyny is a social system where women face hostility because women are making progress and they're women in a men's world. So for example, if sexists would argue that women are less intelligent, and that could be sexist ideals, but they're not necessarily hostile. But misogynists have hostile attitudes, and their goal is to try to control or police women who would like to transgress a patriarchal boundary. So misogyny reinforces the status quo of patriarchal social system, and they use more hostile attitudes. So for example, they would argue that women don't deserve equality because women are emotional or women are less intelligent. And another issue with misogyny is that, so what explains misogyny? There are a lot of speculations, and one of the dominant speculation is that it's men's economic frustration. So it's mostly men who are economically frustrated, projected their frustration onto women. So it is expected that mostly working class men or men with a low income are more likely to have misogynistic ideals. And another explanation is that maybe it's not so much about economic variables, but maybe it's a threat to traditional masculine identity. And this perspective would expect that it's men who are particularly strongly endorsing these traditional masculine norms, such as men should be dominant compared to men or other types of women, explain misogynistic ideals. However, so far, there's no quantitative empirical analysis that try to examine these two possible explanations. So the study aim is, it's exploratory in nature, First one, it examined the possible underlying structure of the misogynistic ideal. So whether there's one dimension of misogyny or more than one dimensions of misogyny using a large set of variables. And second one is that I would like to test which explanations are more feasible. So I examine the associations between socioeconomic and cultural variables and misogynistic ideals. And to do this, I use this data of a nationally representative sample of young Korean men, 1,200 Korean men aged from 16 to 34 in 2015. So this social survey asked many questions to men. And I'm going to use this set of questions as to detect misogynistic ideals. So it's composed of 20 items, and every man in the sample are asked to the answer to this question. So how much do you agree with these following statements about women? So 1, not at all, and then it's a scale, 4, indicating strongly agree. So everyone have to ask each item. And for example, it could include women are too emotional to take on important responsibilities, and it is generally safer not to trust women, blah, blah, blah. And women only demand men when they need something. So it comprised of many items. So the first finding is that I use exploratory factor analysis to detect whether there is more than one dimensions of misogyny. And then factor analysis, based on factor analysis, it shows that there are 3 dimensions of misogyny. One is, it includes 8 items. For example, women seek to gain power by getting control over men, or women exploit men for their own agendas, or women seek to gain power by getting control over men. And I refer these items as manipulative and exploitive women. And another second dimension includes woman bothers just being around, and women complain a lot, even men deserve to lead the world, and the women exaggerate a lot of problems. So these people use, these items use the sexist ideals about women and argue that women don't deserve the same responsibility. So I refer this dimension as devaluation of women. And then last set of a dimension is quite, they don't have hostile attitude. So I wouldn't really call them misogynistic, but for example, these items would argue that women are better at domestic responsibilities because they're meticulous, and men and women should engage in gender appropriate tasks, and women should be responsible, men should be responsible for physically demanding work for women. So these set of ideas are sexist, but however, they're not necessarily hostile towards women. So I would call this dimension as frail woman. And then the next set of analysis, I examine using these socioeconomic and masculine norm variables into predicting 3 different dimensions of misogynistic or sexist ideals. So the first analysis, if you can see from this graph, is that controlling for other demographic or gender ideology, political orientation variables, you can see that socioeconomic variables are not significantly associated with men's ideal of exploitive or controlling women. However, interestingly, this dominance, particularly dominance masculine norm, which would have strong tendency to say that, oh, men should be dominant over many other things. Dominance has particularly strong associations with this ideal for exploitive women. And also strong endorsement for male breadwinning responsibilities are positively associated with exploitive women. However, masculine norm that's associated with emotional control, such as I don't express my emotion to other people, are not necessarily linked to exploitive woman ideals. And second analyses are quite similar. So socioeconomic variables, again, are not significantly associated with this ideal of devaluation of women. However, dominance, masculine norm, are particularly strongly associated with devaluation of women. And the last one, I mentioned that this frail woman dimension, these ideals are not hostile towards women, so I wouldn't call it misogynistic ideals, but maybe it's more closely related to sexist ideals. And again, socioeconomic variables are not significantly associated with frail women. However, unlike this previous one, exploitive woman and devaluation of woman, dominance are not strongly associated with a frail woman. However, one thing that pop out significantly is this emotional control. So it means that men who have strong tendencies to control their emotions are also more likely to say that, oh, women are frail and women needs to be protected. So the conclusion of this exploratory study is that misogyny is not the scale. So there is no misogynist or non-misogyny. Misogyny is multidimensional. So one thing that I detected from exploratory factor analysis is the manipulative woman. So this set of dimensions would argue that woman control or woman wants too much. And another one is devaluation of woman. So this one would argue that kind of highlight sexist dimension of femininity and argue that women don't deserve maybe same equality or same responsibility to men. And then last one, this is not hostile, but benevolent way of sexist ideals. So frail woman, and then they would argue that woman needs protection. And based on my linear regression analysis, socioeconomic variables are not significantly associated with any dimensions of misogynistic or sexist ideals. But important thing is that its strong tendency of dominance, masculine ideals, are strongly associated with misogyny, two types of misogynistic ideals, which includes manipulative women and devaluation of women. So this is the first quantitative analysis that try to explore the dimensions of misogyny and potential correlates of misogynist. And this is the end, and I welcome any questions. Thank you for listening my presentation.
Okay, thank you for the presentations.
Mm-hmm.
I learned about the multidimensionalities of the misogynies. We received the Q&As. So while I read the first questions, please, if you have in the floors, if you have further questions, please write on the Q&A windows. Here is the questions from the Lee Yang-woo.
Mm-hmm.
Says, do you think that there is the problem in the Korean media that the conflict between men and women is growing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this person is talking about maybe the ongoing gender war among this young generation in South Korea. Yeah, and definitely it started with this feminist fight against misogynistic violence. So I think, yeah, and misogyny is one of the key topic that's that comprise this ongoing gender war between men and women in South Korea.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further questions? Okay. Let's see. Okay, if you have further questions on the first presentations, you may ask in the Q&A, and after all these three presentations, the discussion sessions. Okay, let's hear the second presentations. Second presentations was made by the Professor Choi at the Kookmin universities. Please.
Okay. So everyone can see my PPT file. Yeah, all right, perfect. Okay, so hello everyone. So I work as a professor of the Department of Sociology in Kookmin University. And I did my PhD at the University of Paris 5, France in 2000. And I also spent my high school days in Paris. So every year I visited Paris or other European countries to interact with French or Italian or other European scholars who give me a lot of help to widen my insight. So through that experience, I became particularly interested in the difference between Korean and European civility. So today I will give a presentation on how civility in Korea has developed, and in particular, how the civility is enhancing participating using digital technology. So what is civility? Like most abstract concepts, there are several definitions of civility. So it is defined in various ways depending on the academic field. So as a sociologist, I'd like to define it as following. So civility is the norm or value for actions which individuals rely on to act for the survival and the development of a society. So for example, actions to protect nature so as not to cause environmental crisis could show the civility. So this is a photo to show that millions of Koreans gathered to volunteer in order to clean up the worst oil spill in the country's history, which occurred in 2007. And the civility is also closely related to democracy. So it also refers to the participation of demos, which are civils, when a social crisis occurs. In other words, when a social crisis occurs, civils do not impose the obligation to overcome the crisis only to the government or to the elite. Civils try to actively participate in overcoming the crisis, even if some of one's personal interests are sacrificed. However, it has been so difficult for Korean civility to develop until the late 1950s and the 1970s, which was the era of a strong dictatorship. So under the strict surveillance of the dictatorship, Koreans could not properly express their political opinions while democracy has been in crisis. But after the assassination of President Park in 1979, so it seemed that South Korea could have finally the real chance to develop democracy. However, a new group of army officers led by General Jeoun seized the power through a coup d'etat in 1980. 1980. So they suppressed by force the voices calling for democratization, including the May 18 Gwangju democratization movement, which is shown in photos. But here, without any functioning police force during the uprising, the citizens themselves maintained order, and there was not a single case of robbery reported by any financial institutions. And the civility in Korea develops in earnest from the 1980s. In particular, improvement of education has brought about the development of civility. The South Korea became one of the countries that placed great emphasis on education. And the educational attainment in contemporary Korea is of great social importance and strongly correlated with social mobility, income levels, and positions of power. And between the early 1970s and the mid-2000s, the country's university enrollment ratio increased more than tripled from 25% in 1970 to 80% in 2005. And especially the young generation who grew up with this education became more civilized than previous generation. They are more aware not only of their civil rights, but also obligations as civils. And the year of 1987 was also another turning point for Korean civility. President Jeoun raises the calls to further open up the regime, which is the call for direct voting for presidency election. And the first huge demonstration occurred on 10th June, and for about 20 days, more than 5 million people across the country joined in street demonstration. And in 1997, Koreans faced another national crisis, this time not political one, but economic crisis, which was caused by the severe foreign exchange shortage on the brink of default of South Korea in December 1997. But answering a call to help their country, tens of thousands of South Koreans, they swarmed into banks to sell or donate gold in a nationwide campaign to raise badly needed dollars. I mean, nearly 3.5 million people, almost a quarter of the entire country's population, they voluntarily participated in the campaign. And the year of 2000 came, and the digital technology have advanced very rapidly in Korea. Almost all Koreans quickly embraced digital technology, and Korea experienced the world's fastest transition to a digital society. And through this technology for Koreans, it became easier than ever to access the foreign culture, in particular, what civility looked like in other countries. So through this, Korean civility was newly developed. However, Korean civility was not only developed based on Western civility, it became a mixture of Western civility and the Korean Confucian communitarianism, which value relationship with others. So civility in Korea is now manifested through participation using technology. And the digital participation can be explained as participation using digital technology, including using digital device, communicating in digital space, producing digital contents. And then, the last year, so like all other countries on the planet, Korea has also experienced the corona pandemic. The crisis was, very serious one. So in order to overcome this crisis, the most important thing was to prevent the spread of infection. This required the government to control and monitor where the citizens went. So for this, the government attempted to make the use of tracking technology by utilizing QR code technology. So meanwhile, according to the survey conducted in 2019, before COVID, so more than 70% of Koreans agreed that the protection of personal information is very important. But however, the decision by government to mandate QR codes to register visitors' identities was widely accepted by Koreans after authorities struggled to trace people who had visited a number of nightclubs and bars at the center of a virus outbreak in June 2020. Sorry, this interruption. So, however, while such a digital contact tracking system seems like a smart and advanced technology, but it is also important to note that the Big Brother society could come. So Korean civility is asked to keep in check the risk for Big Brother society. And this is a national petition system in Korea, which is a political communication system in which Koreans participate very actively. So using this digital communication platform, Koreans are encouraged to flock to the Blue House petition channel for every single issue they face. And the Blue Houses, should respond to any online petition signed by more than 200,000 people within 30 days of its posting. And the right side, it is written in Korean, but this is a petition for strong punishment to the criminals of nth room, which is the criminal case involving blackmail, cyber sex trafficking, and the spread of sexually exploitative videos via Telegram app. But recently, Korean digital participation and civility are at risk. It is mainly due to two causes. The first is the fact that digital participation takes place through digital images and digital text, which are easy to manipulate. As fake news are created and quickly circulated in digital space, social conflict intensify and the civility becomes in danger. The second one is the fact that digital participation takes place in digital spaces formed by algorithmic logic. As the algorithm only help an individual to encounter thoughts similar to those of that individual, a confirmation bias is created. So this makes it more difficult to accept opinions and the values of others. So I finished my presentation by adding that now for Korean civility in digital transformation era, huge effort should be made to embrace diversity. Thank you for listening.
Okay, so for the presentation, we have learned a lot about the civilities and issues in South Korea. And there is one question in the Q&A from the KDIS TA10 as that I think the current political polarizations in South Korea ahead of the presidential elections is worse than ever. Do you think this phenomena was promoted by digital?
Oh, of course. So as I said, so every now opinion and every political perspective tended to gather in social media such as YouTube. So the logic that YouTube works is totally based on algorithm. So now the people they don't have many chances to access to other opinions. So as I told, it is a confirmation. It brings out the confirmation biases. So the conflict and the hatred between different political groups become more and more serious in this digital era. So which is called now the era of a digital crowd. I don't know the English concept crowd could translate all of this, but in French, which is called la foule, this can be translated as crowd, but la foule in French means that the group of people which become crazy. So that could be my answer.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question from Kim. He asked that, what efforts should the government make to prevent fake news?
I don't know. So it is so hard to answer. So previous governments also tried to solve that problem of fake news also. So but it failed. So I don't know. It depends on the government's effort. So if the level of civility still stays low, I guess that whatever the government makes effort, so it could face the problem of a fake news. So I don't think that it depends on the government. Yes.
Okay, thank you. If you have further questions, as I promised, we can have a chance to discuss it at the end of the 3 presentations. Okay, let's move on the third presentations. So the presentations made by the Agustina De Luca from the consultant of accountability labs. So, Luca?
Yes, thank you very much, Professor. So I'll try to share my screen. I'm very happy to be here joining you all. And I'm going to talk about youth engagement in OGP processes. Can you see my screen?
It's all black.
Oh, it's still that. Okay, no, yeah. So if you can help me out with that, that'd be great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, wonderful. So as I was saying, my name is Agustina De Luca. I am acting as a consultant for the Accountability Lab, which has been working with youth engagement in OGP processes for a very long time now, and building on that, both like OGP commitments and engagement and participation of youth groups in different OGP processes and in different stages of those processes. They're building now a toolkit that aimed for governments and for organizations on trying to promote the best practices and highlight experiences on how good youth engagement can look like. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit of the research that we've done and what works and what doesn't work when trying to engage youth in OGP processes. If we go to the first slide, please, we'll see how youth commitments have increased throughout time in the Open Government Partnership. Like in the past 10 years, between 2011 and 2020, we can see that 92 youth-focused commitments have been made. And here I have like differentiated between commitments that reference youth on a light touch based or those that are actually focused on youth. But either of them, we can see how they have been growing throughout time, although it's still a very low percentage of over the whole or over the all OGP commitments in time. So the peak it's in 2018 with 10% of commitments that have been fully submitted in OGP, which is like around 60 of them. And this is, we can clearly see a correlation between the different efforts that OGP and different governments and the Accountability Lab have been doing in trying to engage youth groups. The first youth delegation that was part of an OGP summit was in Georgia in 2018. So we can see how that has directly grown into more OGP commitments. In 2021, we're still collecting that statistics. That's why I haven't included that, but we will see also a rise in that. However, there's still much to do because just like 2 of them have been actually addressed as either transformative or that actually transformed open government by the IRM, which is the independent reporting mechanism that evaluates the commitments. So there's still work to do in engaging and in including like really meaningfully and disruptive commitments that actually open government and engage youth in the process. If the next one, please, we'll see how like mainly the youth commitments have been through national government. We know that local governments have been increasing their participation in the last few years in OGP. So we would expect in the next couple of years to see much more like this chart to be much more red because there is a huge opportunity for local governments to engage with youth groups because of they're more near to their needs, they are closer, they can reach out to those groups on a more closer basis than the national one, which has a wider problems, wider issues of concerns, wider geographic, geographic of the country. To the next one, please. We've also seen the different topics of the commitments that have been addressed so far, whereas the 50% of that were on participation, so around either training youth groups on OGP values and make them be part of the public policy and on the decision-making process, trying to get them either a public platform to hear for their needs or open consultation for them. So mainly half of them have been on participation. Another big portion of over 30% has been on education, on training courses, on schools, on reaching out to university or high school students to embed the values of OGP in them and trying to train and to capacitate them on all of these issues. And then just the 20% that we have left, around 20%, it's mainly around like different topics, and there's increase of interest in work and youth about like the access of youth groups to their first employment, and on the crisis of those youth people that don't work or study, so trying to get them access to the labor market, and on the electoral system and other issues. And if we see the next one, we'll see that we made a global survey where people from governments and from organizations responded here, and we saw that 50% of the people that answered that question, that survey, have never been engaged in a youth participation process. But however, they have never been engaged in that. They consider it really important. None of them said that they don't consider youth OGP engagement necessary. Those that responded that were part of a youth participation process or a youth engagement process in OGP said that like almost 80%, 75% don't consider it that good so far. So just 16% think it's actually excellent and their government is doing great in engaging with with youth groups or youth organizations. But then 52% said it could be improved and 22% said it's quite limited. So this again shows us that there's interest, there's quite a lot of room to work in, and there's a big space to build on, but there's still a long way to do because of the type of commitments that we have, because of the amount of commitments that we've seen, and because of the type of youth participation that we're seeing here on this chart about like the quality and how it can be improved on that. Of course, this survey has many other analytics and stats that we will be sharing in the next couple of weeks, either on Twitter and on the toolkit itself. But I just wanted to give you a snapshot of the different trends that we are seeing. And if we go to the next one, which I consider the most important slide that I wanted to talk to you about, it's about what works and what doesn't work when talking about youth engagement. And I won't be too detailed here, but it's about key areas and key topics that either if we have government representatives hearing us should consider, and if we have youth groups to embed and to acknowledge all of these and to demand for any of what actually works to your own governments and to make them act on this way, because otherwise it will lead us into what we've seen about limited or improvement needed for youth participation. So it's about defining youth and identifying your audience. Youth, it's a diverse group. There are many intersectionalities in groups. We have high school students, we have university students, we have gender, gender and youth, we have migration and youth, we have vulnerable populations or segregated communities and youth. So we have to consider who we're talking to and act accordingly, because not all of the youth groups have the same problems or the same interests, as well as the age cut, because it's not the same to say we're talking to young people between 16 and 25 that we're talking to those between 20 and 35. Then we need a bottom-up approach. We need to hear what youth groups want, what they need, what their interests are, not just identifying what we want to do and that we want to train or we want to capacitate youth groups, but about what they're interested in. Do they need this? Do they want it? What topics they want? Do they want to be involved in civic space, in women's segregation, environment, electoral system, housing, access to a first job? I mean, what topics do they want to be heard on? And then act accordingly and engage them in those things where they can bring new ideas, fresh ideas, innovative approaches. We have to build on previous networks. It's very common that government doesn't have the concrete outreach to the important groups to be involved on, and there are intermediates that have their own networks that reach out to local communities, to people on the ground. So we have to build on that, engage with other agencies and ministries, those youth institutes, to help them out with the outreach to youth groups, but then also to networks and to organizations that help us out to spread the word and to reach out to other communities that we can't reach out to. A friendly communication. Youth groups don't speak the same as adults. They don't have the same channels of communication. They don't use the same language. So we have to consider who we're talking to and develop specific materials and messages that reach out to that community that we're trying to outreach. mainstreaming, engaging youth in different topics, as I was saying about the bottom-up approach. They want to be involved in all policymaking in different topics. So we need to involve them not only on things that are directly related to youth, but have youth perspective in different topics of the policy areas. Engage them throughout the whole OGP process. We have seen that mainly youth engagement has been in the co-creation process. So we just bring them in to hear their ideas or to get some feedback on a possible commitment, and then we just don't engage with them. And we need them in multi-stakeholder groups. We need them taking decisions. We need them in the implementation phase. We need them to monitor and to learn what worked and what didn't. Of course, consider your resources and your budget and your capacities, because building a youth engagement process is not easy. It's not cost-free. So you need to know what you have and how much you can do. And then that's why building on other networks, partnering with other agencies, trying to understand what you can and you can't do, follow up activities take time, take resources. So trying to see what you have and act accordingly. And then if you need more, try to look for that, to look for funding and allocate specific budget to implement those ideas. And then finally, all of this without political will, without actual engagement of those at the political sphere won't do anything, because they are actually those that make the decisions and that really need to acknowledge that youth involvement in all of this, it's what will trigger change and will make a transformative change in the reality. I won't go to the other column because it's the opposite, but I can share them later if anyone wants to read out it. And just if I have like 2 more minutes before I end, I wanted to share some examples of some OGP commitments that we found interesting, and in the toolkit we'll hear much more. But we have seen, for instance, to create dialogue spaces and to involve youth. Ontario, Canada, created an online platform specifically addressed to people aged between 15 and 29 to hear their words, where they can share their questions, their concerns. Then there's created an online debate there where people interact with each other and come with solutions all together. They hear advice, they improve their proposal or their concern, and then the government responds to them through that same platform, either takes it to create the public policy or just brings a feedback or a response to those concerns, so they're not kept unheard on. It's just a platform with a lot of demands, but no one responding to that. So here we see how it's about engaging with them on like identifying the communication channel and being online where they are, identifying with youth group, with age cut you are talking to, and mainstreaming about engaging them in different topics of the policy making. To the next one, in Chile, we've seen in the past co-creation process, they engage them in specific youth tables, where it was like an open table, blank, where youth groups brought their own ideas, their own concerns. More than 150 young people joined, which is quite a lot, considering that the government hasn't engaged with youth groups at all. They came with a concrete solution, they co-created, they got into a solution together, and which actually didn't got into the action plan because of lack of budget, and because with the pandemic they have to reallocate some budgets. But it was quite interesting, the process, and now there's a network of youth people engaged in the process, and they partner with the Youth Institute to reach out and to communicate with those. So we have seen how they build on other networks, they partner with government agencies and reach out to them. And I have 2 others, but I don't want to go too much. So if you can go really quickly to the next one, we can see Germany has been building a youth strategy with youth groups, engaging them. And in the last one, there are many governments that are engaging with youth organizations in multi-stakeholder forums. And I think this is a very great approach. in trying to engage youth organizations and youth groups, not only in the co-creation process, as I was saying, but also in multi-stakeholder forums, making them part of taking action, of deciding together with the government what's the path around OGP engagement, and then acting accordingly. So in some cases, they've done an open call for civil society nominations as Jamaica, but others are just selecting by their peers. I think that this is the last one. So I'll leave it here. I'm sorry if I overstepped a little bit on the timing, but I'm really happy to answer questions if there are any.
Okay, thank you for the presentations. We have several questions from the followers. Let's begin with the first one. And would it be better for young politicians to appear in Congress? How do you think?
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that question. So can you
There are
repeat?
several
Sorry.
questions. Yeah.
So it's about like youth politicians.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are quite, there's a growing network of young politicians that are engaging in the public sphere and that are transforming how politics are made. We haven't, in this research and for the toolkit, we haven't looked at that in particular, neither in Congress or in ministries or in the executive branch, but I believe that that is the way to transform not only how politics are made, but the types of decisions that are made, because young politicians bring fresh ideas, bring innovative approaches. I've seen that in particular in my home country. I live in Argentina. We have very, very young MPs, and in the executive branch as well, many secretaries and undersecretaries, which are pushing a little bit further the limit of what can be done or the types of engagement, because we have to avoid just engaging with the citizenry or with youth groups just in the election process or when we need something from them. It's about an ongoing engagement, listening to their needs, and then embedding what they are asking for in different areas of the policymaking process.
Okay, thank you. Because of the time limit, I can make the Q&A, the one-on-one. I read all the questions related with the auxiliary request. And then if there is the other questions to Professor Jeoun or the Professor Choi, then I will read it and to match the question to the presenters. So there are several questions about you, the Lucas. Like what efforts are needed to attract young people to politician decision beyond the simple partisan of theirs? So there are the young people's participations politically, or the younger generation now seem to be more sensitive to fairness than any other generation. So their own characteristics can be the issues. To sustain the efforts of youth engagement in the OGP process, can OGP adopt the open government youth collective to ensure youth voices are captured in all process going forward? And the last question is, with the increasing distrust between government and youth, how can co-creation of policy be possible? Okay, there are several questions, so hard to make answers in limited time. Please, let's try.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. So if I start for the first one about what efforts are needed to attract young people, I think it's of course really context-based and about the priorities of the problems or the interests that are based on a local community or in a particular country. But I need that we need to think of innovative approaches to that, not only, as you say, opening up a channel to engage them more, to hear their views on a particular topic that the government is deciding it's important, but creating ongoing dialogues with youth groups focused on their local community, traveling to different areas, engaging with different young groups. As I was saying, youth is a really wide group and we need to identify who we're talking to. So we will go to rural areas, and Uruguay, for instance, has a great example of a commitment in which they went to rural areas to talk to women and what were their problems on that areas. And then based on that, you hear for their problems, you hear for what's needed, so what the challenges are, and then bring together or think together what public policy is needed. So traveling to the countryside, traveling to where the communities are, hearing from them, identifying like what those cross-cutting categories are, what are the different intersectionalities, and develop targeted public policy. I think that's what's needed. And co-creating that, hearing, like asking what their concerns are, what their problems are, and then thinking together what's needed to tackle that. But of course, I mean, it's not just about just opening up a open platform where people can just provide comments to what's being debated in the public sphere or in the political sphere and just not responding back. As for being the younger generation more sensitive to fairness than any other, I completely agree on that. We are on a very disruptive moment of the world. Young people are really interested in fair elections, in what, as my earlier speaker was saying about the civic space and about how does participation in the digital sphere feels, and the need for more transparency on algorithms, or how decisions are being made on the environment and where we are heading at, and like we won't see what the how do you say the consequences of our current actions are, but then young people are really, although they won't live to see those consequences, they are really interested in taking action now for that. So I completely agree on that, and that's why we need to engage youth in the decision-making process, to hear for their innovative ideas, innovative approaches, and trying to build on those ideas. And then about the OGP, the Open Gov Youth Collective, and I know, Francis, thank you very much for your question. Of course, I mean, the Open Gov Youth Collective, I think it's a great network of young people working on open government agenda. And for those that don't know, this is actually a collective, an informal network of young people working in OGP processes or in open government activities on their different countries of OGP countries, trying to work together to engage in the OGP process and to push the boundaries of what's needed and to work on this. And so of course, OGP has to build on this network, because it's not only just engaging with government and asking to get youth participation, but then building on networks of young people on the ground that can talk to each other, that not only can participate on the local process, but that can also peer exchange, share experiences across different countries, and think of together. So definitely that's something that we're suggesting in the toolkit, and we will be working with the OGP as well to engage.
Okay, thank you. And let's move on to the next questions. Actually, next question is asked to the Professor Kim and Choi, both of them. Let me ask this question to Professor Choi. It's about the presidency elections. Now, candidates in the Korean presidency elections are trying to win young votes, but it seems like everyone is failing. Why is it hard to win the support of young people? How do you think?
Wow. So simply say that both of the two main candidates, they are failing to give young generation the image of a person to fight for fairness. So that is the main point. So one candidate, he still cannot overcome the image, connected to, some kind of, real estate mafia. So still the young generation are suspicious. And the other candidate, I don't know, it is related to himself, but the problem of his wife, which is still faces the problem of the falsification of his PhD article. So that could be main point, I guess. But paradoxically, that situation encouraged the young generation to participate in South Korea political issues very much these days. So yeah, that is very interesting point in now in digital participation among young generation these days. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And we are close to the end. Let me ask the last question to Professor Kim Jeoun. You may answer the same questions to ask about the presidency elections, or there is also I found there's some discussions in the chatting windows about the misogyny issues. So would you make some final remarks about it?
Okay, I think this is a great question. I think the younger generation nowadays are actually more participating in political issues compared to the younger generation in the past. And they are deeply interested in several issues, such as gender issues and housing issues. But my perspective is that politicians rarely try to attempt these more structural, deeply embedded structural issues. They're more interested in using younger generation to win the election. So I think the issue is that they're not interested in actually solving the problem. And that's one of the reasons they're failing to gain young people's vote. So I think that's my answer. And is there any more question about?
I think we make the answers for all the questions. So it concludes the youth participation and representation in public life sessions. And thank you again for all the three presentations and the participants. Please give a big hand to all of them and to everyone who made this event possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.